But don't you think this is really extraordinarily far-fetched? I mean, just think for a moment. What is Iran's ambition in the Middle East? I don't think that Iran will think for a moment to relinquish its ambition to become the region's hegemon. I don't think the Saudis will ever see eye to eye with Iran, being that the war between the two by proxy being waged both in Iraq and in Syria. So how do you see them sitting together actually agreeing on any kind of formula when in fact both are fighting to maintain their hegemony in the region? And from their perspective, you know, for the Iranians, they say, well, the Shiite are majority in the Middle East, in the Gulf. You know, if you to count them, the Shiite in Iraq and Iran itself, they are outnumbered. The Sunni by almost 2 to 1. So they feel that they have the right. They have the right to become the hegemon there, and they're waging this war. And they will continue to wage it until they feel that they have secured what they've been dreaming of for so many decades, if not centuries. So, Fred, how do you see any kind of reconciliation between, because the Sunni-Shiite, in my view, conflict has already taken a course that is not going to be easily reversed at this juncture, no matter what happened in Geneva.
You know, at the risk of possibly injecting a note of optimism here, I believe very strongly, and I have no scientific basis by which I can present evidence for reasons that will be obvious. I feel very strongly that the vast majority of Syrian people want their country put back together. Perhaps with a different kind of a system, perhaps with elements of empowered local governments. That would help. You know, right now you have a situation where the education minister in Damascus decides how many pencils go into a school kit in towns and cities elsewhere in Syria. I think most Syrians want to see a country where a sense of citizenship, a sense of being Syrian outweighs who you are in terms of sect, whether you're a Sunni, an Alawite, a Christian, and so forth. The difficulty right now is obvious. Those people, and let's say we're talking about 80% of the population, are essentially unrepresented when it comes to the people who are carrying rifles and machine guns. They are unrepresented. It's this miserable regime. It's Al-Qaeda. It's these extreme Islamists. These are the people who are all armed to the teeth. These are the people who are able to advance an agenda on the ground. Now, I think Mona's on to something with other possibilities at Geneva. The way this is supposed to work, on the 22nd, all these countries that have received invitations, the 30 countries, are supposed to meet in Montreux, where Ban Ki-moon is going to preside over the opening ceremony. Okay? Then, that's it for that group. 2 days later, in Geneva, the two Syrian parties are supposed to meet with Lakhdar Brahimi, the joint special representative, and they're supposed to start face-to-face interactions. Now, the United States, interestingly, is beginning to hint that, yeah, there won't be a formal role for all these other countries, but people are free to hang out around Geneva and talk. And I suspect one of the conversations will be an American-Iranian discussion about what it would take to have something that looks like a humanitarian truce in Syria. In other words, what, if anything, are the Iranians willing to do to pressure their client to stop the barrel bombs, the artillery, the helicopters, the jet fighters, the Scud missiles, and the rockets that are being deliberately vectored into densely populated areas in the hope that maybe a rebel or two will be killed.
But they would do so as long as that serves their interest. Now, will they do so if Bashar Assad is out of the equation?
No, I think they want. No, I don't expect the Iranians to be at all helpful at this stage on the issue of political transition. They need Bashar al-Assad. They need him. They need him because of the services Assad and the regime provide to Hezbollah in Lebanon, which, as long as there's an Israeli threat of an attack on Iran, Hezbollah in southern Lebanon with their missiles and rockets, this is Iran's first line of defense. This is Iran's strategic deterrent against Israel. From an Iranian perspective, nobody is better than Bashar al-Assad when it comes to supporting Hezbollah. So until that Israeli threat goes away, I don't think the Iranians are going to be the least bit interested in political transition. But the humanitarian thing may be different because by many accounts, they were really upset by the regime's use of chemical weapons. And unlike the Russians, they haven't tried to deny it, and they haven't tried to assign responsibility to Syrian rebels for that atrocity.
But then again, if you say the Iranians need Bashar Assad, so does that mean that Bashar Assad ought to become or should be part of the solution? And if he's part of the solution, will the rebel accept that? Will the United States accept that? I mean, this is what then, Mona, if I might turn to you just for another question, that is, let's say Assad is in or out, but that is not going to be the end of the story. Assad inherited not just the presidency, he inherited entire apparatus of the military, internal security, internal intelligence, and every single one of those at the top hierarchy in all of these branches of the government, they have blood on their hands. How are you going to reconcile that under any circumstances to find a political solution whereby the various troubles, they're going to be able to see eye to eye, and hopefully Syria will remain a single unit? Do you see that at all possible?
Well, I think it's important to distinguish between Bashar al-Assad and those immediately around him, the Makhloufs and his brother Maher, and kind of this thuggish clan that forms the heart of the regime, and the broader Alawite community, as well as the broader military and security apparatus. Because my sense is that the answer for Syria is not the equivalent of de-Baathification in Iraq, which is to say a complete wipeout of that security military apparatus. Because I think we hopefully learned a lesson from Iraq about the chaos that then ensued as a result. So in my best world of worlds, and I would actually differ a little bit with Fred about the utility of Bashar al-Assad to the Iranians. I think their position might be a little more malleable, might be a little more nuanced, and may evolve depending on what happens with the nuclear discussions. That might unlock some important possibilities for broader regional stability and a rethinking of the regional security architecture. But for me, I mean, Syria is an extraordinarily difficult challenge. And there's no perfect answer to this. But for me, what would make the most sense is some kind of political transition pushed by all parties, Russia and Iran included, whereby Bashar al-Assad and this thuggish core transitions out. And we can talk about how that happens. But that the broader frame of the state remains.
This is true, but who's going to be able to do just that? Get rid of this 2,000-3,000 who've been conducting all this vicious
Well,
massacres.
everybody has blood on their hands in Syria. I don't think you can say 2 or 3 times. Everybody has blood on their hands, including on the opposition side.
But then you know the culture, you know what's happening, that what happens in Iraq, it's going to happen in Syria. Those who lost relatives, daughters, sons, fathers, brothers, sisters, are they really going to say, well, there is a truth and reconciliation like what happened? What is it going to take? It's going to take more than a conference. I think that many other elements are missing. Look at South Africa, for example, the suffering of the black and stuff. What happened there? Can you duplicate that? What is missing?
Wish.
Well, we can't.
I wish
It
we
won't
had
happen.
Mandela. I wish we had a kind of truth and reconciliation model. In the Arab context, we really don't. But you have to work with what you have to work with. What's the alternative? The alternative is this goes on. You began our discussion by reciting this such sad litany of where Syria is today, in terms of the numbers of people killed, in terms of the numbers of children that are suffering, the destruction of infrastructure. If the fighting goes on for too much longer, there's not going to be a Syria left.